Mr. President, your welfare proposal is nothing but a lot of technical jargon and partisan rhetoric, and... Get off me, Mr. President!
That's what you get for not hailing to the chimp.
Well, hello everybody. I hope you are doing well wherever you are, whatever time it is for you. Today, we are going to be delving into the political world of chimpanzees. When I first came across this topic, I was just absolutely blown away by how fascinating it is. The political machinations that chimpanzees get up to, our simian cousins, is quite extraordinary, and it reminded me in many ways of a Game of Thrones saga to some extent. The rivalries, the personal relationships, the betrayals, the tragedies, they're all there. It could have been written by Shakespeare, but it has been written by nature herself. We're going to be looking at a case study which follows a chimpanzee community and how over a number of years there was a political upheavals, replacements, and regime change. And I think through this exercise, what we're going to see is it's an opportunity to see some examples of elite theory put into practice amongst these chimpanzees. And the distance, they're not humans. So there's a certain distance between us and the subject matter. And so that might help us to see more clearly these principles in play. At the same time, we might see things in their behavior, in their political wrangling, which points to things in our own that we didn't recognize. And so I think it will be useful for that too. And I hope at the end to post some questions or perhaps challenges based on this chimpanzee political theory. Before we get fully into it, let me say, if you want to get into the discussion and have your comments guaranteed to be read out and engaged with, please send a super chat. After super chats, I'll try and get in with the rest of the comment section. And thank you to my members. Great to have you on board. If you want to support the channel and see more shows like this, then it would be really very much appreciated if you could just throw a few quid my way over the next few months. The first video that I'm planning for members in particular is a review of selected themes from the Unabomber Manifesto. So that's going to be for members only. So if that's something that you would like to see, feel free to sign up. It should be in the next couple of weeks or so. So let's get straight into it. So first, how did I get even into this topic? Well, because, I'm not an expert in chimpanzees too often. Well, I was reading this book. Can you see that? The Philosopher and the Wolf by Mark Rowlands. This philosopher... Well, I got this book a few years ago. I was with my family at the Highland Safari Park or Zoo. I can't remember its exact name, where they have polar bears, and they had a baby polar bear. So I wanted to see this. It was amazing, the size of them, and you could get really close. Anyway, I got this book there, and it's about this, just what it says on the tin, really. There was a philosopher who owned a pet wolf, and this book kind of goes through his life with this wolf that he would bring to classes, that he would take for walks, and it would attack other dogs and was just too strong for even like pit bulls. But he wanted to make this comparison in the book between the canine mind and the simian mind. Why is it that we see a discernible difference between apes, monkeys, and creatures like dogs or even cats? What is it about us which is so different in our behavior? And he draws attention to a study, or a few studies, by a very famous primatologist, Frans de Waal. Frans de Waal wrote a book, which I'm going to be drawing on quite a lot here, called Chimpanzee Politics. And he's also written a number of other books, such as The Age of Empathy, which I'll be referring to. He's done probably the most significant and influential work on chimpanzees and bonobos, which are a relation of the chimpanzee. And he tries to show how various aspects of human morality and social behavior can be seen within these sorts of creatures, and how their various modes of acting, their kind of inbuilt morality can inform our own. The project that we're going to be looking at today, he studied a group of chimpanzees in Arnhem, or what it's now called Burger Zoo. It's in the Netherlands. And this was the first place in the world to have a community of chimps living together in a kind of open air space in captivity. It was widely thought before that point that if you do this, if you put a bunch of chimps together in captivity, they'll all rip each other apart, that they're too violent and they'll just kill each other. Well, actually, it was a massive success, and it's still running today. I think in recent years, one of the oldest chimps in the world, it was in its 50s, passed away there, and we can see a very short video of this place. If I can get this up. No, sharing the wrong thing there, sorry. So this is a clip from Burger Zoo, and you can see what it's like. It's a lovely outdoor area for these chimpanzees to play and live their lives and work out all of their politics. You can see they could get quite high into these trees. This chimp is absolutely based, smashes the drone, love it. He ain't having none of this technological stuff in his place. I bet that I just don't know why they flew so close to him. It was a really silly idea. And that they must have managed to get it back though in some way, I imagine. Anyway, so let's stop this video. So that is the context, and so Duval studied this community for. It was a perfect opportunity because chimps in the wild, you can't stay with them all the time. You can't monitor their behavior throughout the day. Whereas in captivity, he could monitor this community 24/7 with his fellow researchers. And so he was able to build up a very detailed analysis of chimpanzee behavior and started to discern certain patterns of social behavior and how the political hierarchy of the group functioned, and how those who sought to challenge it went about doing it. And so we're going to go through this case example in due course. And the dates were 1974 to 1980. But you might be asking, can we really talk about chimpanzee politics? Are chimpanzees political? When we think of politics, we think of politicians scheming and using the media, using well-reasoned or using their reasoning abilities, thinking about it to get one over an opponent. Is that really true of a chimpanzee? Is it as complicated as that? Is it not just more brute instinct and who is the strongest that wins? Well, let's address one of these points first, that uh, are chimpanzees political? Well, if we take Carl Schmitt's idea that a political community is one that has a friend enemy distinction, that is, it recognizes those within the circle or the in group as friends, as allies, as those within your side, and enemies as those who pose an existential threat to the group. Chimpanzees definitely are political. They are one of the few species who will, as it were, go to war with other chimpanzees groups. And whenever they come across a chimpanzee who's not a part of the in group, they are merciless. They will rip it apart. They will just savage it because they see it as an existential threat. But they don't just go about this in a kind of blind fury. They are very strategic in their approach. And this comes to the second point. Can we really talk about chimpanzees being political if they're not using reasoning faculties like we would? If they're not thinking about what they're doing? Is it really comparable with the machinations of the Democrat Party versus the Republicans? Well, I want to show you a very short video, which I think shows that chimpanzees are not just animals without some kind of strategic planning, and we'll like, analyze it a bit more in a second. So let me bring this up. This is from a BBC program, and it shows a group of chimpanzees hunting monkeys. Oh, I realized there's no sound. Sorry about that, guys. I didn't realize that, all that dead air. Basically, the chimps are working together as a team. So you saw one of the chimps go up and start the hunt. He's the driver. You then see on the let me try and get this back up if I can get the audio. So you can see here, there's two chimps, and these chimps are blockers. So their plan is, while the one chimp is driving the monkeys through this, driving them forward, these two are at the sides, and it will drive the monkeys through this gap. And there's going to be another chimp who appears at the far end. So we can play it a bit further.
Heading and climb trees on either side. Older, more experienced than the driver, they must make themselves conspicuous, ready to funnel the colobus between them. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the smartest chimp, the ambusher, is on the move. His objective, to get even further ahead. He has seen the blockers go up and works out where the colobus will be funneled. He picks a strategic tree. He hides and waits. The trap is now set. The driver pushes the colobus on. They begin to scatter, but three seem to be heading straight into the trap.
I can only apologise for the music that the BBC decides to use here.
A gap in the canopy. The colobus are now getting away. The heavy blockers can't leap across. They must climb down in a last effort to reform the trap. And back up again. Now the blockers are back on course. Another leap, right into the ambusher's tree. The trap is sprung. The ambusher grabs. He misses. The colobus turns. Straight into the hands of a blocker. it's over.
So, uh, we could have the argument, well, human beings, as Aristotle said, are rational animals, and the political animal. We deal in coalitions. We work together. We fight against each other, but not necessarily through violence, but through, well, it can be through force, but through a variety of means to scale the social ladder to become dominant over other parties within our community. And that requires some level of forethought. And thus, the chimp or the animal who is not rational, who doesn't have a reasoning faculty, cannot be, by definition, political. But what I wanted to show you here was the fact that, okay, these chimps might have not thought out in a discursive manner the plan for hunting, but you can see that they do have a level of strategy, which may come from intuition. It's a sort of tacit knowledge that they have, that, and this allows them to cooperate and work together to achieve a goal. Deval talks about how this level of intentionality to their actions, that they're doing these things to capture a monkey to achieve a goal, that they use behaviors instrumentally to achieve goals, shows a level of reason, even if it is below the level of conscious cogitation. So I think then and we can see in politics that a lot of the time it isn't about thinking through fully and clearly a plan of action, but rather what we often call political instinct. That there's a certain intuition for reading a situation and following certain courses of action to achieve an end. And it's certainly in the conservative tradition, there's a strong emphasis upon a certain modes of feeling, which are experiences of received wisdom through a tradition, through a culture, and concord with something beyond actually the reasoning faculty to a divine or sacred order. So there's a very strong emphasis on that level of activity, which isn't just a clearly rationalized and explicit way of approaching things. That actually intuition or instinct can be strategic. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And so if that's the case for these chimpanzees, if they do have that level of forethought to an extent, that they can develop plans on an intuitive level for the attainment of goals, then they can be political. But there's another dimension to this too, which is that chimps are not just able to form strategies to achieve goals. Because in a sense, you could say the same of a pride of lions, that they too will have blockers and groups working within the pride when they hunt zebras, right? There'll be the drivers, there'll be the ones on the side, and then they will entrap them. What chimpanzees and simians in general have in distinction to creatures like cats or dogs is what Deval calls Machiavellian intelligence. And this is the idea that chimps are able to deceive other animals, particularly other chimpanzees. If we think about this for a second, to deceive somebody, you first need to be able to imagine somebody else's perspective other than your own. You can't just think about what it's like for you. You've got to think, okay, in this situation, if this thing happens, that person over there or that chimpanzee over there is going to think this and is then going to respond in a certain way. So you have to have the ability to remove yourself from your own perspective and put yourself in another's shoes. And then to deceive, you then need to say, okay, if I do X, if I make up this thing and convince them of this thing, they will do Y. So then it becomes a strategy you can use to achieve a certain goal. Witten and Byrne produced a paper on this, where they went through a number of examples in which chimpanzees used deception to achieve certain goals. For example, there was a line of chimpanzees walking through a forest, and one female chimpanzee saw a tree that had lots of fruit on it. But this chimpanzee didn't want all of the others to find out, because in that case, there would be less fruit for her to eat. So what she did, she didn't look at the tree. She just kept walking and then stopped at the side of the road and let the others pass. So none of them were aware that this tree was there. And once they had all moved on, she went over to the tree and started eating. She was aware of if she looked at the tree, the other chimps' attention would be on what she was looking at. So she deliberately did not indicate it to them. Her behavior deceived them as to what was there. And as a consequence, she was able to achieve her goal of eating more delicious fruit. Another example, and I'm afraid this example is a little bit more explicit, and we'll be coming to some of these dynamics more fully in due course. In a chimp community, the alpha male has the right to mate with the females and will attack any male which attempts to mate. So male chimps who are not high in the hierarchy have to find sneaky ways to mate with the females. And often the first way of courting a female is to get her attention and show that in her presence you are turned on. So, but you don't want to show the alpha this, right? Because if he sees it, he's going to attack you. So you'll often have a male chimp with his facing an alpha, and he'll be leaning forward and in such a way that he obscures his genitalia. At the same time, his behind will be facing a female, and his erection will be in plain view of the female, but it's obscured to the alpha. So he's using deception. He's imagining what two chimps are seeing, the alpha and the female he wants to mate with. And as a consequence, he's using certain behavior to get one over on the alpha and entice the female. And then, if he's successful in courting her, they will go round into some bushes or somewhere hidden from the alpha and start getting it on. So we can see then that this is a really valuable tool in strategic thinking, because it allows you to manipulate not just your environment, but other agents within it, other actors, such as your superiors, to achieve results that otherwise you would be unable to do. And this is for Duval and for Roland, who from this book. I'm not sponsored to show this. He probably doesn't endorse any of my views. That's fine. Your dog or your cat, well, certainly a dog, is very limited in its ability to do this because it can't imagine in the same way as a chimp your perspective. It just is. It just expresses itself as is. Whereas a simian, because it can imagine another's perspective, is able then to manipulate attention in ways against, well, not necessarily in their best interest, not on the surface level. You can pretend, you can perform. And this is necessary in a chimp community compared to a canine one, because power is not afforded through strength alone. The little clip I showed at the beginning from The Simpsons, as there's a few more people here, I might just show it again to illustrate this point.
Mr. President, your welfare proposal is nothing but a lot of technical jargon and partisan rhetoric, and... Get off me, Mr. President!
So this example works, this joke works, because we think of chimpanzees as extremely violent, which they are. And in a sense, the joke works because we think, okay, the alpha chimp must be the strongest and most violent, the savage, who countenances no discontent, no fighting back against him. it's the most aggressive, caveman-like one that will reach the top. However, in practice, what Deval shows is strength alone, violence alone, is nowhere near enough in a chimp community to become the alpha male. What is required is the negotiation of social relationships. It's about building coalitions and undermining the coalitions of your opponents. It's about gaining support and fulfilling certain roles within the community that will gain you support. It's about it's about the social network and how you manipulate it and operate within it to your advantage. In essence, the politics of a chimpanzee community do not reduce to force alone. There is actually a whole web of aspects which require a level of intuitive uh, or political instinct, we might say, that without you can maybe get to the top for a short time, but you're not going to last. You're going to need something more, an ability to work the community in your favor. And so this is how we end up with perhaps lessons in elite theory coming through in due course. So without further ado, I have a little slideshow of pictures from Deval's book that we will be able to get up in a second. No, that was totally not the plan. Let's see, is this going to work? Now, hopefully this is going to work this time. No, it's coming up on both screens for some reason. I'm sorry about that. We'll just go through it like this. So, the community we're looking at is from 1974 to 1980 in Berger Zoo, and this community is primarily made up of females, like most chimpanzees communities. But the political battle, the political arena, although it will involve some females, chimpanzees are a patriarchal species. They're not like bonobos, which are matriarchal or gynecological. And there are essentially three main players in our story today. On the left, we have Yerowin, and we have another picture of him here. Yerowin was the dominant male, the alpha male, from 1974 to 1976. He was an impressive specimen who, during that period, was basically unchallengeable and looked for all the world all-powerful within the community. He was probably a bit older than some of the others. I think he was heading towards 30, and we'll get into a wee bit more about what he was like in due course. Next to him, in the middle here, we have Luit or Lute. He was a wee bit younger than Yerowin and coming into his prime during this period. And then finally, on the right, we have Nikki. Nikki, at the start of this, was a child, essentially, an adolescent. And his entrance onto the scene comes with him becoming an adult chimpanzee, essentially. The political wranglings between these three define the hierarchy of the troop over this period. And so we're going to be following them in particular. There is one other male, Dandy, but he doesn't feature in any respect. And I think that's an important point to start with, is that not every male chimp is going to be in these political conflicts. Dandy never gets close. He doesn't even try, for all intents and purposes. He lives on the kind of periphery of the group, and he just remains there throughout. And I think this is reflected in the fact, and so he gets very poor kind of reputation and power and sexual privileges in this group. And this speaks to the fact that in most societies, in human societies, most men will not be close to political power. Most men will not form, or a large proportion of men will just not be on the sexual hierarchy ladder either, or they'll be very low and have very little success. It's actually not the norm for all men to be married or to manage to achieve relationships. It's actually going to be not a select few, but there's certainly not 100%, right? And so we need to recognize that fact. Certainly, that's where something like incels come from, essentially. That not every man is going to be successful, and certainly in the chimpanzee community, males, it's going to be. So we've got 3/4 of them getting some luck here, but it's not all of them. So Yeroen was the alpha male from 1974 to 1976, and part of what it meant to be alpha male was that Yeroen received greetings from all of the other chimps. There was a hierarchy underneath him as well. So you would have maybe the alpha male, and then you have the beta, the second in command. You then have maybe a hierarchy amongst the females. So there was one female chimp called Mama. She was the one of the elder ones, and she was quite a bit bigger and quite strong, and she was kept discipline amongst the females too. And so when you come into the presence of a superior chimp, you are meant to greet them. And this greeting takes quite a unique form. So you can see an example here. Here is Nikki, and here is Yeroen. So Nikki is bowing down essentially to Yeroen, and he'll probably be making some low grunts, low panting. And these are signs of respect towards Yeroen. As a male chimp, Yeroen will, in this case, he just ignores him. It's like a courtier coming into court and Henry VIII just kind of carrying on with what he's doing. But he may then step over the male chimp as a sign of his superiority. You can also see Yeroen's hair is kind of on end here. Alpha male chimps are constantly like this. It kind of enlarges their bodies. It's an expression of power and taking up the space, taking up the room. This is my domain. And so this is enhanced with the shrunken and low down male chimp before his alpha, before his chief. For females, they will do something similar. They will bow down like this, but then they will turn around and allow the male to sniff their bottoms. And this is to, in many ways, kind of present themselves if the male wants them. That's kind of the idea. So this is a really key part of chimpanzee social order. And for many years, for these 2 years, pretty much without fail, the chimps greeted Yeroen. All of them did this. And that's the true sign that he is an alpha male. Others might get greetings from those below them, but not those above. So Lewitt, who's on the left here, he did not get greetings from the senior females, but from most of the other chimps, while Nikki, just as an adolescent, didn't get greeted by anybody. So it's quite a big, serious deal. And you can see that these implicit or intuitive actions are reflecting a degree of importance within the hierarchy, who you show social deference to. We've got another example here. This shows it even better. This is Lewitt, and here's Nikki. It's almost like looking at a courtier bowing before his monarch or lord. It's uncanny, and this shows the hairs on end much better. Well, Yeroen's power started to crumble, or came under its first conflict, when Lewitt, who we see here, started not to greet him. Indeed, he started doing other behaviors around Yeroen. Particularly, he would display. He would do bluff displays. Now, bluffing is what we're seeing here with his hair on end. It's quite intimidating. He would come close to Yeroen. He would start hooting very loudly. He would be running around, maybe throwing stones. He would be banging on trees and such like. And he would be doing this in a way that's directed towards Yeroen. or in his presence around him all the time. So not only is he not showing him respect, but now he is also humiliating, he's intimidating, and he's doing this in front of the ape, the chimpanzee, who is supposed to have his respect. This very brazen act, we could say it's a form of undermining Yeroan's authority, because the very fact that it's not just like the actions themselves, it's that he feels able to do this at all suggests that Yeroan doesn't have the authority that is afforded to him, and thus undermines his authority somewhat. We can see this with prohibitions on certain forms of speech. I'm reminded of the antinomian controversy that I've discussed a while back on this channel. This took place in the 17th century in America, in New England, and the Puritans went across. Many of the Puritans there believed in a sort of free grace theology, which was the idea that once you have faith, you're not required to follow any certain behaviors, certain laws, and although you would naturally do so. And those ministers who taught that you should base your assurance of salvation on your works were teaching heresy. Now, this caused a big conflict within the community, and one woman in particular, what was her name now? I've completely forgotten. Anyway, Hutchinson, Anna Hutchinson. She was brought before the kind of court in New England, and the charge that was put against her, because she was arguing for this free grace theology against most of the ministers. What's interesting is she wasn't accused of heresy. She was accused of undermining the authority of the ministers by saying that they were teaching a false doctrine, and thus they should not be ministers. The issue wasn't her own beliefs, it was that she was attacking the right of those in charge to be in charge. And I think we see something similar here. The problem with speech like this, blasphemous speech, we might include hate speech, is not the actual words themselves. It's that you're actually saying those people who set those laws shouldn't be our rulers. And in a way, that's what Lewitt is doing to Yeroan. I'm going to challenge you. There's nothing you can do about it. And by doing that, I'm showing that you shouldn't be in charge. But he also does other things as well. Yeroan's power. And here's an example of hooting, right? So this gives you an impression. He's running around doing this hooting. Yeroan's power isn't just based on his physical strength. It's based on creating intimate bonds with the rest of the community, in particular with the females and their children. How does he go about this? Well, all alpha males in a chimpanzee community enter into what's called a control mode. And the control mode is basically that chimp which seeks to maintain the order within the community. They protect the chimpanzees from threats, particularly those within the community. So, for example, if a chimpanzee so we've got Nikki here. If Nikki starts attacking a female chimpanzee, the alpha male will probably enter in to protect the female and drive him off. This thus gains the support of the females because they feel safe with him, and they can be sure that their children will be safe given the alpha's protection. He also provides for them. So it was quite common for these chimpanzees, the alpha male, to go up to the highest trees into quite dangerous parts where there might be live electrical wires close by, and then either break off branches to allow the other chimps to climb up and get good food, or to actually pass down food to the rest of the chimps, kind of break it on the floor and things. So the alpha male provides and protects. And you could see this as kind of the political formula of the chimpanzee community A political formula is that kind of rationale for a regime's existence, that basis, that moral or legal basis by which it justifies itself and its actions, its decisions. And this often appeals to the deeply ingrained beliefs or feelings within a population. This is Mosca's idea, but we see it amongst most of the elite theorists. So, for example, the divine right of kings justifies Charles I and his actions, or liberty, happiness, and prosperity, liberty, equality, and fraternity, equality, diversity, and inclusivity. These are all slogans, but they're a kind of justification, a sui generis. I can never say that. A kind of foundational principle. Well, in this case, we have perhaps the most basic one, which is probably included in most political formulas. As alpha male, I will protect you and I will provide for you. But there is also another dimension to this relationship, and that is grooming. The alpha male will groom his community. He will look after. He will kind of, and by grooming I mean that process where chimps will clean each other, eating insects off each other and such like. And this is a deeply intimate act, which creates a strong bond between those who are doing it. The closest I could think of actually was if you go to the hairdresser or to the barber. I'm not sure about where you guys come from, but in Britain, it's quite common when you go to the hairdressers for your hairdresser to have quite a chat with you while they're doing your hair. You know, just talking about stuff. And I think, and you know, that's not common of a lot of jobs. There's not a lot of jobs where the person doing it will feel comfortable just having a friendly conversation with you. But your barber will, even if he's never met you before. And I think it ties in with this, that this grooming process that the chimps are doing binds them together in a very intimate way, because you've got to feel comfortable with the other. You're you're making yourself very vulnerable to them, and so it builds a degree of trust. And I think this is quite an interesting dynamic, because we don't think of trust or maybe empathy as being an important part of politics. But if the alpha male is to get the support of the female chimps, he's going to need to build that bond through these intimate acts, through embrace, through touch. He needs to do this in part because female chimps want a strong bond with the father of their child, just as most species do, because they want that guarantee that he will protect their child. I think also he's. I think also we can make a comparison with something that we witnessed very recently. When the Queen of Britain died and the Commonwealth, when she died, one of the first acts that Charles did, having become king, was go out and greet the crowds. He shook their hands and spoke with them. And this was a deeply moving moment for many people in the United Kingdom. Not just because of what happened to the Queen, but because he chose in that moment to meet those people who had come out to support him. And it was an act of physical touch. He was shaking people's hands. He was talking with them. There was a degree of intimacy there. Now, I appreciate on a level of the mass and scale that we have in our societies now precludes our politicians from getting into intimate relationships with us. Indeed, who would want to have an intimate relationship with most politicians? But that kind of action where it's not particularly instrumental, there's an end in itself, which is that relationship between the ruler and the people. And there's a degree of empathy, or at least there's a perception of empathy on behalf of the ruler for the people, is key for gaining trust. It's not enough to have the political formula of protect and provide. you need to also build that belief that you care for your people. And this is expressed through actions, rituals, which provide a level of meaning beyond just the utility of protect and provide. And so we are going to see this with things like the coronation or civic events. So Henry VIII holding a party for his courtiers and dressing up as Robin Hood. This in itself has very little to do with protecting or providing. It has very little to do with establishing a political formula, but it builds up a familiarity and empathy. So I think this is a really interesting aspect of chimpanzee politics. Now, when the first conflicts began between Louet and Yerowin would so let's say Louet has been hooting and so on, and one time he comes right up to Yerowin and he's hooting in his face, he's jumping around, and then he slaps him in the face. Well, what happens next? Yerowin runs off, goes to the females, and the females come with him and attack Louet. So Yerowin draws upon his base, and Duval basically equates the females here to the masses in a kind of Machiavellian approach. The noble maybe goes to the masses, and with the masses attacks this other noble, Louet, and drives him off. And he can do this because of the bond he's built with the females. He's got their support because he's been grooming them, he's protecting them, he's providing them. Well, what Louet does is he basically attempts to break this support. And he does this in two ways. The first is to engage in what Duval calls separating incidents. And this is where anytime Yerowin comes close to a female, or a female comes to Yerowin, maybe to groom, to mate, to just spend some time together, Louet will attack. He will first intimidate, he will do his hooting and such like around there, and if the female stays, he'll keep doing it, and then he'll attack. He'll just go straight for the female and beat her. And even if the female has left Yerowin, he will beat her. And he kept doing this over and over again. In time, this meant that none of the females were sitting with Yerowin. In turn, this meant also that they were not either being groomed by him, they were not having that intimate moment and building that bond of trust and empathy, and they were not mating. So his dominance was not being displayed, it was being undermined. This had a dramatic effect. At his height, Yerowin was mating with his actions constitute 75% of all mating within the community. When Louet does this, it reduces to under 30%. So it's a massive decrease in his time with women, and we can actually see this on this chart. It's not a great chart, I'm afraid, but this shows Yerowin mating, like this is at the height of his power. Look how far it drops. It goes all the way down. So it's a big change. But at the same time, so Louet punishes the females for being in the presence of Yerowin, but it's not he's not just attacking indiscriminately. He only does it in that case. Beyond that, he's super generous. He grooms all the females. He gets food for them. And it's quite interesting because the day before he will attack, or maybe shortly before he attacks Yerowin, he will go around and groom certain females. And those females often don't then intervene. So there's almost an eye for an eye, or a relationship being built there. If I groom you, you won't go and help Yerowin. And so we have, on the one hand, Yerowin is being isolated from his community in two ways. First, his political formula is being broken, And it's being demonstrated to the females or to the masses that they cannot trust Yoren's ability to protect and provide. And so over time, and secondly, that bond that he has with them is being eroded. He literally cannot groom them anymore. As a consequence, the masses lose faith in the political formula of Yoren, or his ability to protect and provide, and no longer trust him. And so, whereas at the beginning of the conflict, which takes place over about 72 days, Yoren can draw on all the females to come and support him. By the end, none of them come. So that's a big factor here in Luit's rise to power. But second, there's another factor, because if Luit had been doing this by himself, okay, he's probably a stronger chimp than Yoren. He's a bit younger. He's coming into his prime, whereas Yoren's an older chimp. He wouldn't have been able to take on Yoren and the females by himself. He needed an ally. And he worked in what Deval calls an open coalition with Nikki. If we go back up, we can see. So actually, this is Luit and this is Nikki. And we have them again here. There's Nikki, there's Luit, and there's Yoren. Now, Nikki was an outsider to the group at this point. Not an outsider. He was on the peripheries, I should say. He had just become an adult, essentially. So he had no respect from the rest of the community. But what we find is when Yoren would start intimidating and humiliating Yoren through his actions, maybe having mating right in front of him or hooting in his face, when the females were rounded up by Yoren to come and support him, Nikki, out of the blue, would jump in and attack the females. He would not to kill them, not to really hurt them. Males have very sharp canines and long canines compared to females, so he could do a lot more damage beyond just their greater physical size and speed. But it was never to really damage them. It was more just to keep them occupied. And if ever he was about to get caught, he would just kind of get out of the way because he was faster and stronger. This allowed Luit and Yoren, or Luit, to kind of get Yoren by himself and really intimidate him and dominate him, whether not necessarily physically, it didn't often break into physical violence, but just in terms of his defiance. So what we see here is, even if Yoren could call on the female support, Nikki cuts off that support. He cuts off the strength of the ruler who relies on the masses by distracting them, by attacking them, and throwing them into disarray, thereby putting these two, the elite and the counter-elite, Yoren and Luit, into direct confrontation. And without their support, he's too weak, physically too weak and socially too weak to confront the stronger chimpanzee. Nikki's actions could be seen then as the strength of an organized minority against an unorganized majority. There are more females in Yoren's camp than the two male chimps that they're up against. But without leadership, they are disorganized and unable to really support Yoren. By contrast, Luit and Nikki, although they had no kind of signals or weren't explicitly working together, their cooperation is able to overcome many more chimps. And this really shows demonstrates that a small group which has a kind of common goal or common purposes and common strategy will always outwit a bigger group, even if it was just a straight up fight, they would lose, because they're able to follow through a strategy in a way that a bigger group will struggle to do unless it too has a dominant minority. So say there were two chimps who were organizing the females. to fit in a strategic way, they might be able to beat then Nikki and Lewit. But without that oligarchy, essentially, they'll just be thrown into confusion and unable to really handle it. So through this, so we see, Deval says this is an open coalition, as in contrast to maybe a closed coalition. A closed coalition, both parties have a common goal. By contrast, an open coalition, the parties might work together, but they have different goals. For Lewit, it was about becoming the alpha male. For Nikki, it was about getting the respect of the females. As I told you at the beginning, Nikki did not have any greetings from females while Yeruin was the alpha. But by the end of the conflict, all the females greet him. They all bow to him. And he stops this behavior as soon as they start greeting him. So we can see it was a strategy for him that he wanted to be respected, and so he attacked them until they respected him. And this also helped Lewit in two ways. First, by cutting off Yeruin's support, but secondly, by showing the female chimps that Yeruin was unable to protect them in the current system. So further undermining Yeruin's political formula. Lewit a few times did attack Yeruin, and Yeruin definitely came off worse. And as we came to the end of this power, this displacement of Yeruin's power, he was viciously attacked by Lewit and Nikki, and one of the females, and who had gone over to their side. And it was clear that he had lost. And on day 72, Yeruin greets Nikki. Yeruin greets Lewit. And by greeting him, he had basically conceded that he was a chimp who was lower than Lewit in the social hierarchy, in the political hierarchy. So Lewit had ascended to become the alpha male. That is the first stage. And I should say as well that there was a chimp within this process. It wasn't just like conflict all the time. Every day there was periods where there would be gestures of reconciliation. One chimp might put out a hand to the other, and then they would embrace and kiss and maybe groom. So there would be large periods where Yeruin and Lewit were grooming in each other very intensively. And I think that's quite interesting because for two reasons. One is it shows that although they were in direct competition, they acknowledged that they needed to be in a position where they could at least have some level of trust with each other, that they had to make up with each other for the community to survive. Because fundamentally, although these chimps were fighting for who should be on top, they were within the same group. They were friends, essentially, if we think of the friend-enemy distinction. If there was a rival troop, they would team up together to attack that rival troop. So they needed rituals of reconciliation to allow for them to have a conflict over who should be in charge without it utterly disintegrating the social fabric. The other point, though, is that there was a hierarchy to these reconciliations. So the chimp who first extends the hand is the one that's in the supplicant's position. Moreover, the first stage in reconciliation was for the dominant chimp to step over the other one, so reaffirming the hierarchy, and then there could be embrace. There would be periods of long standoff while neither chimp was willing to allow the other to step over. And as we come towards the end of the conflict, Yeruin starts making panting noises to try and get Lewit to reconcile, and these panting noises are akin to those made during greetings. So Lewit used these reconciliations as a way of affirming his dominance, by essentially forcing Yererin into the supplicant's position. So they had a lot of power. But it's not something we often think about in politics, the need for rituals of peacemaking, even between conflicting parties, to sustain them within the political system. But in a sense, is that not the purpose of democracy? That we decide who should be part of the hierarchy through a vote, and we all are told to accept the vote as final. So there's a certain reconciliation or a sustaining of peace, that it's not going to break out into force and violence. And that's why the first with Russiagate, questioning Donald Trump's election victory as being influenced by Russia, and then later with the January the 6th and the doubts about Biden's election. That's why it's very serious in the American context, because the loss of trust within electoral politics and the democratic process necessarily removes one of these reconciling points. And so the two sides are no longer able to compete within an existing social fabric that's required. There's no mechanism whereby after the competition they can live together again. It can only break out into further conflict. Whereas these two chimps are able to go to bed at night without fearing they're going to be attacked, because before they go to bed every day, they have a reconciling act that though they're in very serious competition, they can find a ritual which will allow them to coexist. I think that's really interesting, and maybe chimps chimps have something better there than most of us. Anyway, Lewitt takes charge, and Nicky becomes his second in command. He manages to get the female chimps to all bow to him, and Yererin too, in time. And so what we have then is a new hierarchy. Lewitt is the alpha male, Nicky the beta, Yererin is third, and then the rest of the community. And these three, at this point, suddenly become a kind of trio. They primarily stay in the center of the enclosure and don't spend as much time with other chimps. They become their own political arena and formula. Now, when Lewitt becomes alpha, he starts taking on many of the responsibilities that we saw Yererin doing. He enters control mode. He starts providing for the female chimps. He also protects them, and he does something quite interesting. He becomes a loser supporter. So we spoke about how Yererin would intervene in fights to protect chimps and gain their support. What Lewitt does is, if there's a fight going on, most of the time, if there's one chimp who's losing, he will go and support that chimp, and he will help them win. What that means then is that he comes into conflict with stronger chimps like Nicky, who would often attack other chimps. He defeats them. He gains the support of the lower chimp, the loser chimp, and this is good for two reasons. First, it builds a coalition that he can draw upon if he's confronted by Nicky again. But also, these loser chimps are themselves not able to challenge Lewitt. So he's building a base of people who are unable to kind of undermine him, but he can use to keep in check rivals. And we could see this as an example of de Juvenel's notion of the high and low coalition against the middle, or the center will unite with the periphery, with the losers, with the masses, even against a rival node or a power. It's like if there's the king and there's a noble in a castle, well, the king's going to get the peasants in his support and take that castle for himself. He wants control. So the high and the low unite against the middle. Lewitt is a loser supporter. At the same time, Nicky is himself starting to challenge for the alpha male position. He doesn't like this anymore, that Lewit is suddenly turned on his ally. He wants to be respected, and in fact, he believes he should be in charge. And Yeroin, who had, he lost his position, suddenly becomes the key to the balance of power. Because Lewit and Nicky are, you can see them here, they're similar sized chimps. They're quite powerful. Both of them are strong and in the prime. Well, Nicky's quite young, but he's going towards his prime. Neither of them can bet on defeating them in a straight one-on-one fight. What they need, each of them, is the support of Yeroin. With Yeroin, they can, they can outperform the other chimp. So both of them start fighting for Yeroin's attention. Lewit and Nicky will both try and spend their time with Yeroin, groom him, give him food, give him protection from the other one, and so on. And Yeroin, so Nicky, every time he sees Lewit, so Nicky then starts separating incidents against Lewit. Every time Lewit sits next to Yeroin, Nicky starts hooting at him and running around, and all the behaviors we saw Lewit doing to Yeroin, Nicky's now doing until Yeroin leaves the space. At the same time, Yeroin starts playing Lewit and Nicky off each other. He wants them in a rivalry. So every time Lewit is mating, Yeroin calls Nicky, and Nicky attacks Lewit. Every time Nicky starts mating, Yeroin calls Lewit, and Lewit attacks Nicky. So he's playing them off each other and reminding them that they need his support throughout. It's very interesting. So Nicky starts these separating incidents. He starts hooting and displaying at Lewit. And in time, Yeroin and Nicky form a coalition. And this, we might say, is a closed coalition. Here we have Nicky on the left, Yeroin on the left, and Nicky on the right. Bunch of buddies here, bros, chimp bros. And they, when they form this closed coalition, so it's not an open one, it's a closed one, with the basic aim to displace Lewit as alpha. And they start not to greet Lewit. They start hooting and displaying and bluffing in his presence. And Lewit is absolutely terrified from this. He panics quite a lot in this presence. They perform a violent attack upon him. And although Lewit has the females on his side because of his grooming, of his control mode behavior, the first violence attack really does it. He can't defend himself, and the illusion of power is shattered. And almost overnight, Nicky becomes the alpha male. Before we come to Nicky's reign, I just want to make a really key point here, which is that, as I said, Yeroin had the balance of power. He was playing these two other stronger chimps off each other and showing them that they needed his support. And why did he choose Nicky then? Why didn't he stay in with Lewit, who obviously wanted him as his right-hand man, against Nicky? Well, Devals argues that Yeroin followed what's called a minimal winning coalition or a minimal winning strategy. That is, well, we often think that to win, what we're going to do is we're going to build the strongest possible army, strongest possible force, and then smash our opponent. But actually, that isn't generally the case. Usually, what we do, humans do, is we form a coalition which is just enough to see us to win. So if we could choose between, I don't know, let's say I could team up with a group who are super strong, or a group which are equally as strong as me, and I can win with either, I'll probably go with the equally as strong rather than the super strong. And this is because of the role it affords you within that coalition. Lewitt could probably see off Nicky by himself, but wanted Yoren to stop him joining Nicky. So he's a kind of add-on to Lewitt's strength. He's not core to it. But if Yoren joins Nicky, he becomes indispensable to him because Nicky can't displace Lewitt without Yoren. And it's the same principle. If I team up with somebody who's super strong, in the politically super strong, to overthrow the ruler, well, why can't they then dispense of me? Whereas if I team up with somebody who's just enough, together we can overturn, they don't have that advantage over me. So the minimal winning strategy ensures your place once the victory is achieved. And so when we're thinking about our own political strategy, I know there's a lot of people who are in this kind of orbit who are thinking of these things. It's not just all YouTube kind of discussions. There are definitely some people who are behind the scenes trying to work on these aspects. We need to think about, okay, we're going to have to form coalitions, but who are we wanting to form a coalition with? Who is it that we can make our support indispensable to, and so shape the direction of their, if they got power, we can shape the nature of that power. We don't want to be in one which is overpowerful, because then we will be dispensed, like many coalition partners have been in the past. So this is a really important point for those who want to form political alliances, to make sure you're doing so with people that can't just throw you away after they've won. And so this is what Yoren and Nicky do, and Nicky becomes the alpha male. But the problem for Nicky is, although he has formal rank, he is the alpha male, he has the privileges. If we look at the mating chart, so we can see here, Nicky gets into power about here. Whoa, he's getting a lot more mating. Or not quite, because that is not at the beginning. This is probably where he becomes the new alpha male, and his goes down, whereas Yoren's goes up. And this is because Yoren, although not officially the alpha male, he has to greet Nicky. He is the one who is most respected by the females. Nicky never won over the female support. For one reason, he didn't spend his time bonding with them, grooming, building that trust and empathy. He wasn't providing for them. And crucially, he wasn't protecting them. He was a winner supporter. Whereas Lewitt supported the losers, Nicky supported the winners in fights, which was a very bad strategy, not least because you're supporting your rivals. Yoren became the control mode operator. He would defend the losers. He would defend the females and the children in fights, often chasing away Nicky. So then he builds up, female support for him. And so he, in the first year, had more mating than Nicky. So Yoren becomes the kind of power behind the throne, as it were. Nicky needs Yoren to keep Lewitt in check. So he needs to be there. He can't just get rid of him. But on the other hand, and he needs the female support that comes through Yoren. But on the other hand, he cannot challenge Yoren because he needs him to overcome Lewitt, and Yoren has all the females. So we can see from Nicky's point of view, he's in a bit of a sticky wicket here. He can't really displace this Yoren, who seems to have all the social respect. And in fact, Yoren gets greeted more than Nicky in the first year. So Yoren's playing the blinder here because, okay, he's lost his position as alpha male, officially. But on the one hand, he's got Nicky with him to keep Lewitt in check. On the other, he's got the females to keep Nikki in check. So he is the power base. He's got all the main power in these coalitions. And he's playing off the various parties against each other. On the other hand, though, Nikki, in the second year, we see his mating go wildly up and Yoren's go down. And this is because Nikki plays Yoren and Luit off each other. In terms of power, Nikki will use Yoren anytime Luit challenges his authority. And together, the two of them will chase off Luit. However, if Yoren, in the second year, whenever Yoren came close to a female chimp to mate with her, Nikki would get Luit, and together they would chase off Yoren. So Nikki, although he doesn't have the support of the masses of the females, he plays the two nobles off each other. And by doing so, he keeps both of them in check. One, he gives more power, one, he gives more mating privileges. And the two are kind of locked in a struggle to get Nikki to side with them on all issues, but he won't. And in so doing, he divides up. He has a coalition with both, but they're in different spheres, as it were. One is sexual, one is political. I mean, they're both political, but we might say one is formal rank and one is sexual, whereas they should be married together. So in so doing, he prevents either of these chimps from ascending too far in the political rankings, which combine these two spheres together. So we can see that, so Nikki and Yoren are both in coalitions which depend upon each other, but are also in other coalitions which nullify and negate the power levels of the other, thereby keeping themselves in powerful positions with each other. And I think this is a really key point too, because in a lot of politics today, let's go back to them, because from this point onwards, they remain sharing power essentially for the rest of this time. So this becomes a stable coalition which dominates the community. So this is the winning formula, we might say. And I think there's 2 points here, at least. One is that often in our politics, we think in very binary terms. You're either Republican or Democrat. You're Labour or Conservative. You're a monarchist or a Republican. You're for Brexit or you're for the EU, etc., etc. And we think of our sides in very friend-enemy distinction in ways, and that's essential in part. But when it comes to actually wielding power or ascending to power, these chimps show a level of political intelligence that not many people seem to do, because they don't just see it as black and white. They recognize that to stay in power, you must be able to wield coalitions. You must be in coalitions in such a way that your coalition partners, how to put it, it's difficult to express. They're essentially they share coalition partners, but they're also in coalitions which undermine the power levels of their coalition partner, but not disastrously so. And in so doing, there's a balance of power. There's checks upon what the other can do to you, ensuring that you both need each other. And so when we come to kind of navigating the political landscape of today, there may be value in thinking rather than thinking, okay, us and them, thinking, okay, I want to ascend to power. Who do I need to ally with? But also, how do I keep my ally in check? Which other alliances should I form? And we shouldn't see these as absolute alliances, but rather situational, or certainly in spheres of activity. So, as I mentioned, Nikki allies with Yerin when it comes to formal rank, but against Luit, but he will ally with Luit against Yerin when it comes to sexual politics. So we too could maybe see it in this way as well. That perhaps we want to, as a group, might want to ally with one actor in one area, but then when it comes to another area, we ally against them, thereby keeping ourselves in a strong position. So that is a, and I'm sure much of that goes on behind the scenes. You know, you've currently got Tony Blair. Many of you will know Chad Chimp Tony Blair, who is on the one hand working with the Conservative Party on Northern Ireland, who's been a formative influence on Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, who was her opponent in the leadership election. He's also, you know, at the Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer is definitely trying to frame himself as Tony Blair, second coming. He's trying to appeal on the basis of a Blairite agenda, and Blair certainly kind of backed Keir Starmer too. So you see Blair kind of operating both sides of the system, and thereby keeping himself indispensable to both. Now, this isn't quite the same. He's actually gone beyond any of these chimps, because whereas Nikki really needs Yerin's help to overcome Luit, Blair's beyond them all. He's playing all sides off against each other and is indispensable in a way that's kind of frightening. But he too is in certain coalitions, right? Because he works with the Bill Gates Foundation. So that's one of his coalition partners. But then again, he is also working with the World Economic Forum. Now, are all of these totally on board with each other? That's a hard question. It certainly seems so on an outward front, but within, there will be certain alliances being drawn, certain checks and balances being kept against each other, and so on. I think, in a way, one of the ways that you would need to kind of start destabilizing it is or one of the problems is that there is too much of a strong bond between these people. A lot of them are friends and colleagues, and so they don't have this sort of arrangement we find with Yerin, Nikki, and Luit, where although they've got certain bonds, it's the checks and balances which keep the social order in a good place and accountable to each other. That's certainly something we've lost. The American system, the Constitution, with the division of powers, is in theory meant to do this. It's meant to have this sort of effect that we see here. But we've seen the erasure of that distinction, if it was ever a distinction. So that kind of the place for that has been eroded, and perhaps not only for political assent, but for when you're in power, you need to think about that too. And that your opponent is probably, or your ally is probably doing the same thing to you as well. You know, we've had people, I'm not going to go down that route actually. I was about to say something that is a whole other topic, maybe for a members stream. So, what are some key points then to draw from what I think is a fantastic study? And if you have the time, I'd really encourage you to go away and read Duvall's book, Chimpanzee Politics. You can find it on Zed Library. If you've got an account, you can get an account for free. Get a PDF. It's a good book. And there's quite a bit that I haven't covered here. Well, what are some key points to draw away? Well, one of the key points that I think immediately comes out is that it's not just a matter of brute strength, right? Animals like chimpanzees, it's not just the strongest one, because Luit was probably strongest, But a strong chimp who lacks support from the rest of the group is going to be overthrown by a coalition, or a chimp who has multiple coalitions to support their rule. Because coalitions afford respect, there's a recognition that this chimp should rule in the place of the others. And that is the basis, we could say, is formed through two things. First, the political formula of protection and provision. And at its root, we can see most regimes essentially promises, or at least modern regimes. Our current regime essentially says, okay, you submit to us, you give up various freedoms, various rights. We might even say, give up your traditions, give up your way of life, give up your community gives up its homeland in a way to allow for modernism and mass immigration and the deconstruction of your culture, and we will provide for you. We will give you food. We will give you healthcare. We will protect you from threats from abroad, from terrorism, let's say. And we will make this exchange. This is what C.S. Lewis called technocratic paternalism. And certainly the technocrats, the World Economic Forum types, the Yuval Hararis, Elon Musk, and so on, their basic promise is, okay, the current system doesn't do what it says it will do. We'll do it better. We'll do it through better technology. So you want better healthcare. Okay, we will implant certain devices within you. We will develop these devices like the neural link, and you will be able to able to move limbs that you weren't able to before. We will plant devices in you to passively monitor your health state so we can prevent you getting ill. So we're no longer just curing, we're preventing. So this seems to be the political formula of our current class. And this is essentially the chimpanzee political formula. But in addition to that, and what our rulers seem to lack, and what the technocrats seem to lack, is the second aspect of developing control or ruling, which is building trust. Building trust through intimate bonding experiences. That could be, for a chimpanzee, that is through grooming and embracing, playing even with your subjects. Now, on a community of the size of 20 to 30, that's possible. And certainly in kind of in earlier times, we see these sorts of events taking place. You might drink from the same cup, for example, as your lord, and so on. You would kneel before him, and he might embrace you in turn. At our level, it comes through acts showing the care of the ruler for the people. So, for example, there would be a day every year, an annual event where King James VI of Scotland, first of England, would come out and lay his hands upon people in an act of healing. We see the same in France with various kings as well. It might be through the sponsoring of certain events. So we saw recently in the UK the Commonwealth Games being held here. This is a collective action sponsored by our rulers where we come together and enjoy something together. So this forms then a level of cohesion and belonging. And certainly the royal funeral was probably the best example I've ever seen of this. So, but crucially, if it's obviously instrumental, it's not going to work. And that's one of the problems with something like the Commonwealth Games, is the rulers don't show genuine affection for their subjects. Grooming certainly does, right? It really shows that intimate bond that's trying to be formed there. And rulers need to do that. in some way if they're going to achieve power or maintain power. We saw that breaking the political formula and breaking this trust was key to the replacement of one chimp with another, with one alpha with another. And this was particularly through an organized minority, such as Luit and Nikki, or Nikki and Yeroin, overcoming a leader who relies on the masses for their support. If you rely on an unorganized majority, they will be outmaneuvered at every turn by a coalition able to follow a clear line of strategy and implement it with effect, because the smaller number is more easily coordinated, more easily directed in their actions. In fact, you need an organized minority to guide the majority if it is to be an effective form of defense. What these chimps do is they separate the leader from that mass and thereby overcome quite easily. So that's one important aspect, and you can do this by breaking the political formula or the trust, thereby isolating the leadership group. The best system harnesses both the organized minority and the masses, and is essentially a set of counterbalances. So remember, we had Yeroin and Nikki in a coalition, but also in coalitions which threatened the other one, thereby making each of them indispensable to each other without being able to overthrow the other one. Thus, they form a strong coalition which is unassailable because they have their own independent support, but they need each other to overcome another threat. So there's this, whereas Luit was unable to do that. He gained the support of the females, but didn't have an elite in his corner, an elite group in his corner backing him also. So that's really key as well. And finally, we also have minimal winning coalitions, right? So, and this ties into the previous point. It's not worth your time going into a coalition with a more just dispense of you. What you need is to be in a coalition with a partner who together you're just strong enough to win, and then consequently you will be able to remain in power with them. In turn, so we could see this maybe in electoral politics in the UK, where the Conservative Party essentially they allowed the Liberal Democrats in the 2010 election, I think it was, they allowed the Liberal Democrats to take, which are a small party, kind of styled centre left. They attacked certain Labour seats, and the Conservatives didn't really field a strong candidate in those areas. They allowed the Lib Dems to overcome Labour in certain seats, thereby giving the Conservatives a victory. And then they formed, because the Conservatives had a minority government, they didn't have enough seats to have an overall majority, they formed a coalition with the Lib Dems. In theory, they could have maybe formed a coalition. Well, it's not a perfect example, but we could say, suppose there was another right-wing party there who would have given them more seats overall. They probably wouldn't have joined with them, but stuck with the smaller party that gave them the win, because they could have more control within that relationship. So that's kind of where it comes into play. So that's important for a movement which seeks to have some influence, that it needs to pick its alliances carefully. With that all said, I want to then just turn to a final point, which hasn't really come up so far, but I think it's important. When these alpha male chimps, or these chimps fighting for the alpha male spot, come into conflict, Duval noted that many times they showed emotions of extreme terror, panic, stress, but they would do this in private. They would so when you see a chimpanzee grin, let's see if I can find a picture of one to illustrate the point. So okay, let's see. Okay, some of these are a bit hilarious, but let's take this one here, right? So we think, okay, this chimp's smiling. This is actually a facial expression of extreme anxiety when they do this. And so when many of them, so Lewitt and Nikki, during their most intense periods of conflict, it was quite common for Lewitt to be covering his mouth like this. He'd be covering his mouth to hide his grin, to hide his fear. Equally, Nikki would be doing the same, and then when they were out of sight of the other one, they would take their hand away, and the emotion would be there. When the male chimp who was losing was being dominated, he would basically run and throw himself on the floor and throw a tantrum. He'd be screaming, throwing his arms out, and so on. By the end of conflicts, the male who had lost would be often a totally broken wreck of himself in the past. A shadow of what he was in the past, I should say. He was often deeply traumatized. Yaron certainly was for a long time before he got the confidence to work with Nikki against Lewitt. And so I guess my point is here is that each time one of these chimps took the place of another, it wasn't a fundamental change within the system. It was the same kind of social structure, same political hierarchy, but with a different chimp on top. So there wasn't a fundamental revolution in the politics of this group. And the political system as it was deeply distressing to these chimpanzees who were in it. It wasn't an enjoyable thing. It was actually really harrowing for everybody involved. So we might say then, okay, are they capable of changing their political hierarchy? We might think, okay, bonobos, which live in this matriarchal society, do not have this sort of competition playing out quite often in their communities. At least it's not been observed in this way. They're certainly nowhere near as violent. They don't engage in kind of warfare in the way that chimps do. They're much more altruistic and compassionate towards each other. They don't have these male competitions for the top spaces. Could a chimp become like that? Well, it seems not, because as I said before, this was not a discursive. These chimps were not thinking discursively about these things, and after a long period of kind of intensive thought, acting in these ways, it was intuition. It was instinct. They cannot help it. This is how, after thousands of years of evolutionary development, this is how these chimps are. They naturally engage in this process. They cannot escape it, no matter how hard they might try. Yeroin is compelled to fight for the position of alpha male. So is Lewitt, so is Nikki. Now, to a certain degree, this still seems to be also true of human beings, right? We might see significant change in certain economic realms, in cultural realms, but fundamentally, our hierarchies are always there. There is always an elite minority and an oligarchy who run the show, whether that's formally recognized or not. They will be in certain coalitions with the masses, with other elites, holding each other in check, in constant rivalry, fighting for the top positions. And that's true of every political system. And even within, those political systems where it seems that there is more accountability, or there is more power to the masses, say in a democracy, well, as many of you know, okay, you can elect a government, but a government's only one part of the hierarchy. And actually, they may not be the top of the hierarchy. Often, our governments receive instruction as to the policies they should put into place, or kind of they are being guided as to what policies they should follow by NGOs and certain institutions which will do this development for them. They'll also be directed by the activity of the financial markets, and the decisions that they take are going to automatically affect the decisions made in government, because which government is going to be willing to see their economy crash for disagreeing with the BlackRock and Vanguard on social policy, right? So, and then there's the media as well. The media has a huge influence on the policies that are taken. Which politician wants to be called racist? Which politician wants to be called homophobic? Which politician wants to face the ire of the media for their political decisions? In a democracy, the media wields a huge influence on what policies politicians can take. So, although formally the Prime Minister is the alpha of our country in the UK, in practice, they are subject to a whole range of social pressures and coalitions which hold them in check at the very least. At the very worst, they are held below a number of institutions which take a more direct role in our policies. So the changing of who's in charge doesn't change the fundamental nature of our system. But could it be changed? Is it even possible for there to be some level of change? And I'm not talking about the disappearance of an organized minority, but rather the dynamics of power transition. Because it strikes me that the current one is pretty bad. Now, for a chimp, as I said, it's instinct, and to a degree, it's instinct for us as well. But human beings are not like most other animals. We have a faculty which is different. Now, for Aristotle, that is the faculty of reason. We have the ability to rationally think about things in a discursive and logical manner. We can articulate our thoughts in language, and in a complicated language which allows for nuance and for deliberation in a way that a chimp never could. We have instinct, but we can overcome these instincts often through our reasoning ability. Or at least that's what Aristotle thought. The Bible, the Christianity, and other religions too, will talk of human beings being made in the image of God. And this is distinct from all other creatures. Now, again, there's a huge debate about what is the image of God, and maybe one day we'll do a stream on that. Some people have said it is our reasoning ability. Some have said that it is our ability to love. Some have said that we are relational creatures. God is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Father loves the Son, and that love, in an Augustinian model, is the Holy Spirit. And so human beings, when they are in loving relationship, are displaying the image of God. Either way, we're made in the image and likeness of God. We have special faculties, something different about us from most creatures. And to me, what this does is it opens up a capacity for change, which maybe doesn't belong to a chimpanzee. I think of how Saul of Tarsus, who after with the early church, Saul of Tarsus was a Pharisee who persecuted many of the early Christians and was involved in the execution of Stephen and was on his way to Damascus. And as he approached Damascus, there was a blinding light and a voice from heaven, which he took to be Christ. Christ speaking to him, "Why are you persecuting me?" This moment changed his life, because from that time on, he no longer persecuted the early Christians. In fact, he became one of the apostles, spreading the message of Jesus Christ around the Mediterranean, and he died as a martyr. He went from somebody violently attacking Christianity to somebody who lived a peaceful life and was killed for his new faith. He was changed in his mind, in his desires, in his actions, in a fundamental way. And I wonder if this part of him, this image of God, or his reasoning faculty, or his soul, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that makes human beings distinct from the chimpanzee, allows for this capacity for transformation when it comes into the presence of the good, the true, and the beautiful, or indeed if the good, true, and beautiful acts upon them. If that is the case, is it possible then for there to be not an obliteration of the kind of hierarchy? There's always hierarchy, but is there a different way of competing or for the transition of power? My point is perhaps this, because this might seem a wee bit of a diversion. There seems to be a school of thought that human beings don't fundamentally change, even if they get a new religion or have a different idea, come to a new ideology or view of life, that they fundamentally remain the same in their um, operations. There might be a slight change, but when it comes to politics, there's some fundamental realities that are consistent for human beings throughout time. We might say that this leads to the kind of political confrontation we see on a regular basis and displayed by these chimpanzees. It's instinctual, and our reasoning is often just a post hoc rationalization of what we've already instinctually intuited, what we already know on an intuitive level. There's another point of view which suggests that human beings are open to fundamental change in a way that a chimpanzee isn't. That some kind of transcendent power, perhaps even just culture itself, can have a significant impact upon who we are, our morality, our beliefs. And this is particularly held by those who believe in a supernatural order, or a transcendent order for that matter. Thomas Carlyle certainly thought this. He vigorously argued that we need to all undergo some kind of conversion process, a transformation of our hearts towards that which is true and good, towards that which is higher than our own petty desires and ambitions, to that which is worth staking your whole life upon. That to me does seem like a key distinction within the current distant right. I think it's an important distinction because it really impacts the way that you view politics. If you think that human beings are unable to change in their fundamental nature, if the mind, the will, the emotions fundamentally stay the same, then we have to think purely in terms of elite theory and the political wrangling we've seen with these chimpanzees. If you think that the mind, the will, the emotions can be redirected towards better ends, can undergo substantial change when they come into the contact with that which is higher, or even stronger, that there is a supernatural force that actively does do these changes in people's lives, then you don't necessarily think that we should follow the Machiavellian approach because you think there's a different way that is possible, or at least there's an alternative, right, in life. So that's something to think about. I don't know where to go with that quite yet. I need to do more thinking about it, but I certainly think it's an interesting discussion this raises because for a chimp to have his intuitions overturned, he'd no longer really be a chimpanzee. But it seems like a human can have their intuitions overturned or redirected, like the Apostle Paul, and still remain human, indeed become more human in many people's eyes. Anyhow, that is the end of my presentation on chimpanzee power politics. I hope you have enjoyed it thus far. Now let's just do some. I saw there was a super chat. If you've got any questions or comments, please do send in super chats, and after I've done them, I will have a look through and maybe respond to a couple of comments that I see. So we have Prince of Parma for 14 Rand. Thank you, sir. Thank you again. Very much appreciated. Always good to see you around on the channel. He says, Machiavellian monkeys, technically autocratic apes. Yeah, I think that's a good description. Autocratic apes. They're very autocratic. You do not mess with their social order. That seems to be the only one tonight, so let's have a look and see what other comments there are. And remember as well, just before we do this, I will be running a stream, not this week, but maybe next week, for members only, on responding to Ted Kaczynski's Unabomber thesis or manifesto. So if you want to check that out, come and join us. It's going to be good fun. So we have a good number of folks here. Hello, Vingle. Hello, Patricius von Kempen. King Emperor Penguin, good to see you, sir. Herlock Shomes. Shire Tory. Oh, top lad, Shire Tory. Spinley. Miot Yuri, good to see you. Just watched the first few episodes of Fall of Eagles and can only imagine how much more chimp our politics have become. I have not seen that, I'm afraid. But we might say that perhaps, what I've hoped to show is many of the principles of politics throughout history are present in chimpanzee communities already. And in fact, chimpanzees seem, or at least these chimpanzees, such as Yeron and Nikki, show a higher level of political intelligence than most politicians, which is is quite funny but sad at the same time. I guess that's referring to the hunting the monkey, perhaps. But certainly they do share this trait with human beings, and they also operate wars as well. They'll be very strategic in attacking another group, perhaps, you know, taking time, waiting silently, watching them, what's going on, and then suddenly doing a surprise intimidation attack upon other chimps. So they're very calculated in their approach, quite ruthless and cold-blooded. And Vingle says much the same. They will eat the brains of the losing chief. Well, I've not heard that, but they certainly eat enemy chimps. I've seen that. It could be a ritual of humiliation and affirmation of the community itself. But yeah, there's certainly cannibalism of enemy chimps, which shows the friend-enemy distinction very clearly, right? They're so they see them as such a threat to themselves that they're willing to just kill them, and then they will eat them in victory. They will not tolerate their existence. Yep, that's totally true. Hello, Sail Away. Give me a bonobo. I guess bonobo, right? Any day. The altruistic bonobos. Maybe another time I'll do a stream on bonobos. Deval's done a lot of work on them. They don't seem to share much in our political frame. He suggests that we should be more like bonobos, or we should try and become more like bonobos. I'm not convinced for various reasons, but that's another debate. Yep, that's true. And most animals have very sophisticated languages. Birds as well. It's quite impressive, and it's quite humbling. It's really humbling, actually, to think about. Lots of good comments about the jungle music that was being played in the background of that video. Hello, Cheek Valentino. No comment. You may say that. I couldn't possibly comment. I have not seen a magician perform his tricks before, apes. Maybe I should do that. I will do that after the stream. Let's see. Oh, is this Mark Rowland's not being endorsed on this stream? But it's a very good book. It's a very good book. I don't think he would endorse. He basically says it's impossible, I guess. Yes. Chad nerds. Chad chimps. Chimps are chads. They would dominate the political reality. And we kind of know this, right? Because think of something like Planet of the Apes. We know the premise is if chimps gained the powers of language and powers of intelligence of human beings, they would dominate us. And I think that's right. Not just for their strength, but they have better political instincts than us for whatever reason. So they'd probably win. They'd probably win. Planet of the Apes is actually a prophecy of what's going to happen. And when the American Empire falls, it will fall under the fist of the ape. Social network was never married to morality. No, I don't think that's true. I think we've seen that the chimps, they're bonding with one another, their treatment of each other, their kind of eye for an eye approach is bound to the social network. It affords certain rankings to each other. They show respect to those who uphold a certain code of morality. So I do think it's bound up with it. And just by the way, just on the point of intimacy, because you mentioned the word married, and it just struck me. We see the most intimate bonding of coalitions in the ancient practice of marrying off daughters to the sons or of political people that you want to make a coalition with, right? What more intimate bond can there be than that of a marriage union? So when you're playing Crusader Kings 2, that can make it very like 2D and just pure Machiavellian, but actually think about what it would mean for a sister or a daughter that you choose to have them married to somebody that you want to form a political alliance with. That is a really tight bond of intimacy. There is that in our current politics in ways that is probably not wise to talk about here. But there is that dynamic in our political world today. But it's not as much. It's not as much. Certainly, it's not as prominent an aspect as it once was. And there's going to be lots of debates about, is it right? There's no consent for the woman here, or perhaps for the son. But it certainly formed more stable coalitions. in politics. Chimpanzee. Step over it. Yeah, you literally step over your subordinate. It's amazing. There's some pretty awful comments that I'm not going to share. Disappointed, guys. Come on, you can do better than that. Someone send this stream to Joe Rogan. I'd be very honored if Joe Rogan would watch the stream. Top lad. He would love it. He'd just be so excited about chimps all the time. Simp for chimps, I guess, or our chimp overlords. Ironically, Tony Blair is he's the most attuned to his inner chimp. And yet we had that nice super chat from Prince of Parma. I'm aware that we're getting towards UO, so I'll speed up a wee bit here. We have some comments here from Spaz. I guess that people just get too bored and tired to entertain politics to that point. Yeah, probably. And in a way, it becomes there's a certain aspect of politics which is about just subsuming your identity within a broader unit and identifying yourself on the side and finding a place of home, essentially, that many of us have lost. So then it becomes less about actually gaining power and more about being part of a tribe. That's something I hope to do a stream on in the future. Our kind of relationship with concepts of home and such like. Proportional representation is back on the table now in the UK, it looks like. Yes, certainly the Labour Party seem to support it, which I think, given what we've been talking about, is a stupid idea from Labour, because they want to be the dominant party in a coalition, right? They want to gain power. They're unable to do so in the current electoral system because of the way it works at the moment. The Conservatives look like they will probably, even if they don't win outright, they can get enough seats to stop Labour getting a majority, just because they've got so many safe seats. And Scotland has gone SNP, so Labour will be, even if they're the biggest party, they'll need some kind of coalition. In proportional representation, they will still need coalitions, but they'll be smaller. Whereas in first past the post, Labour would still be a bigger party, much bigger than any coalition partner. So I can see from the smaller party's point of view why they would want this. It certainly gives them more power within any coalition. Why Labour would want it, I cannot see for the life of me. It seems... It just seems nonsense. Conservatives will never support it because, for the same reason, it certainly would undermine their ability to dominate British politics in a quite serious way. It would open up the possibility for a genuinely conservative party, which is not offered in the British political spectrum. Whereas there are a lot of left-wing parties who have some traction in Britain. So it could be a good thing. I don't know. But from the main political party's point of view, I don't understand why Labour want it. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Byron Brand Stepwise. You're very generous, and I think we are friends through the power of the internet. Many of us are becoming friends, and if we ever meet in person, so some of us have, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's like chimps grooming each other. Thank you very much. Very generous. The threat of the result of not treating friend-enemy distinction seriously, that the whole political system just vaporizes, becomes zealous idolization of friend-enemy distinction. Yeah, I can see that. I think, well, we. I'm not going to go into full blown discussion of it now, but I think that's right, and I hope to look more at it in a future stream on George Orwell's uh, Notes on Nationalism, which is an excellent essay, and it's well worth our attention. Where he kind of talks about this there. However, I think I think one aspect that I should have mentioned in the important takeaways is that of the we touched on the rituals of reconciliation, which allow these chimps who are in strong competition with one another not to become existential enemies, but to maintain themselves as friends within the political system, or at least friends within that community. Although they are fighting for the alpha male position, they're not um, mortal enemies. And in their fights, they show this by not using their canines, by not attacking serious parts of the body, but maybe like a hand or a foot, so not parts that will kill you. And without that, even if you have the friend enemy distinction, if you can't have conflict with your friends within the political system without them becoming your enemies, that political system will also disintegrate. So it's not enough to be clear on to a degree like, okay, we are friends and you are enemies. You need to be able to have differences within your coalition that can still be held together. You actually need space for conflict in your coalition of friends, because if anybody who threatens you is a enemy, it's going to break apart because there's it's just not stable. There will always be conflict within friendship groups. So I think that's also a risk with the idealization of the friend enemy distinction, is that it doesn't allow for that space. But to have that space, you need institutions and rituals of reconciliation. And if you look at previous streams that I've done, I've looked at how Scottish Protestants and Puritans used the ritual of public repentance and public fasting, which in many ways mended these, conflicts within the community. Certainly, slander, for example, was dealt through this, and so there was a pacification of uh, potentially mortal and fatal conflicts. So I want to thank you all for watching. I think this has been a really enjoyable stream, and I really found it fascinating to look at these chimpanzees and their political life and how it can inform us. In way of chilling, this Saturday I'm going to be, Lord willing, on Apostolic Majesty's channel. We're going to be looking at the final part of the Silmarillion, the Rings of Power, and so that should be a lot of fun. Then next week we are, I'm doing every Tuesday at some time between 7 and 9. Next Tuesday I'm very privileged to be joined by Black Horse, who often features on Radical Liberation's channel, and we're going to be talking about health, or in particular the idealization and dominance of healthcare in ordering our society. So that should be a lot of fun. Till Saturday or next Tuesday, God bless you all. Thank you again for joining, and good night.